already set. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, how much?
But it's going to be, well, we'll talk about
That's a good barbecue.
I'm telling you.
I'm really sleepy now.
I told you.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so we do.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask Mitch to fix it.
Is this somebody from Apex? It is Untitled.
Do you mind doing
Said
that? Do you mind letting
I
me
have
real
not.
quick? Okay.
This was about this one.
I'm not sure.
got
Just
it?
tell her that
Got
the
it?
dollar a little chilly.
Squeezed in, but it's like
You may want to say Apex Town Council next time, and it has to be longer length.
I think they might have not printed it.
That's plausible. I don't know their system very well.
Thank you. I saved the other ones that you did.
Oh, good.
It's,
This is the fans too, I guess. It's the fans that make it colder. Because they're saying it's cold. Is it the fans? The fans?
It's better than it was earlier.
Okay, all right.
all the
You want a jacket to lean on? Try to get you on over here.
I know. So I should have brought my sweater. I thought it'd be good with this. He gets up here. Are we all set? Yeah.
We're ready.
Okay. Hold on. Here we go. Okay. Everyone ready? All ready? Good evening, everyone. We apologize for starting a little bit late. 2 minutes. We had a 5 o'clock work session, so we're in place to start our 7 p.m. Town Council meeting. So welcome. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and if we could start with a moment, that's fine, a moment of silence. Okay. If you would stand with me and stand with all of us and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're going to begin our meeting with a presentation. And it is a proclamation to raise public awareness of Indigenous Peoples Day in Apex 2019. I will go ahead and read the proclamation signed by our Mayor Lance Olive, and then those on the council or in the audience who would like to take a photo down below for this, please feel free to do that with us. So, proclamation from the Office of the Mayor, Indigenous Peoples Day in Apex 2019. Whereas the town of Apex, North Carolina recognizes that the indigenous peoples of the lands that would later become known as the Americas have occupied these lands since long before European settlers, and whereas the town recognizes the fact that Apex is built upon the land where indigenous peoples hunted and lived, and whereas the town values the many contributions made to our community through indigenous peoples' knowledge, labor, technology, science, philosophy, arts, and culture, and whereas the community southwest of Apex, known as Friendship, brought together indigenous peoples, African Americans, and European Americans, and whereas the town of Apex seeks to combat cultural prejudice, eliminate racial discrimination, and to promote awareness, understanding, and good relations among indigenous peoples and all other segments of our community. And whereas the town promotes equality of opportunity consistent with the U.S. Declaration of Independence for all people, including those who descend from indigenous peoples, and desire to uphold policies and practices that ensure equal access to opportunity and their rights to pursue life, liberty, and happiness in America. And whereas Indigenous Peoples Day was first proposed in 1977 by a delegation of Native nations to the United Nations-sponsored International Conference on Discrimination Against Indigenous Peoples in the Americas, and whereas the United States endorsed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Declaration, on December 16, 2010, and the Declaration recognizes that Indigenous peoples have suffered, I quote, Indigenous peoples have suffered from historic injustices as a result of, inter alia, their colonization and dispossession of their lands, territories, and resources, end quote. Now, therefore, Lance Olive, as mayor of the town of Apex, does hereby proclaim that the town of Apex shall recognize Indigenous Peoples Day on the second Monday in October. And be it further resolved that the town of Apex shall continue its efforts to promote the recognition and awareness of the indigenous community, and be it further resolved that Indigenous Peoples Day shall be used to reflect upon the ongoing struggles of indigenous people in the Americas, and to celebrate the thriving culture and value that indigenous peoples add to our town. And be it further resolved that the town of Apex encourages businesses, organizations, and public institutions to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day. I'll read this for Mr. Mayor. In witness thereof, I hereunto set my hand and cause the seal of the town of Apex, North Carolina, to be affixed this the first day of October 2019. Signed, Mayor Lance Olive. So whoever would like to join me from the council, and then whoever would like to join us for a photo from the community, that would be great. I'm not used to this. Thank you. Left to right, I guess. So, okay. No. Okay, ready?
Thank you.
All right, let's look left to right, I guess.
All right.
Oh, let's start with the town manager.
Yeah, right here. 1, 2, 3. Keep it right there. Smile like you mean it. One more for good measure. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to get one?
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming.
One more, real quick. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, council.
So thank you, everyone. So we're going to move on to the time for our consent agenda. The consent agenda items are considered to be routine and enacted by one motion with the adoption of the consent agenda and without discussion. If a member, though, would like to discuss an item, the item must be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. Then I'll present the consent agenda to be set prior to taking action on the following items. And I think I'm aware that there might be one item pulled. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'd like to pull number consent number 2 for discussion.
Okay, so consent number 2, motion to approve the ordinance amendment related to mobile food vendors. If that pleases the council, we will put that for new business 2. Okay. All right, anyone else? All right, so is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
All right, all in, okay, there's a second?
With the
Removal,
yep, second.
okay. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, no opposed, all right. Motion passes, we have our consent addenda and move that second item to new business 2. All right, now is the time to set our regular meeting agenda. And I think the manager and both Attorney Hoey have an item. So I think the manager wants to request a change in order.
Yes, ma'am. If it would please the council to hear the work session item prior to the closed session item.
Okay.
Very, very brief work session item.
Okay, so if it pleases the council, move the work session 1 up to after new business 2.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, and then Attorney Hoey, you had a change also?
Yes, in the closed session item, number 1, consult with town attorney to protect attorney-client privilege, we can delete that one.
Okay.
We'll still keep the closed session item number 2.
Okay, so we will remove number 1, and then number 1 will be the personnel matter. One thing. All right, I think that's all changes. So is there a motion to adopt the meeting agenda with the proposed change in order and removal of 1 item in closed session?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda with the changes.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. No opposed. All right. So now's the time to start our time of public forum. If there are folks who have already signed up for public forum or for any of the public hearings, on the podium outside, there should be a participation policy here. Thank you. And something I will also note that, okay, thank you, that as the mayor talks about using the American Sign Language, deaf and hard of hearing, so if you hear something you like, instead of clapping, which sometimes stops things, you can do the fingers if you would like to show support for an item. All right, let's see here. All right, so for the public forum, we have 3 people signed up. So we'll start with Beth Bordeaux. And I think I should remind you, you have 3 minutes. All right.
Thank you. I'm Beth Bordeaux. I live at 1044 Branch Line Lane in Apex, and I'm also the executive director at Western Wake Crisis Ministry. I see some papers passing along, and that's what I was hoping that you guys were getting, so thank you very much. Thank you all for this quick opportunity. I'm just going to make 3 very brief points. One is, I know that there's a transit plan in process, and I'd like to just advocate for having a stop on that plan at Western Wake. And my reason for advocating around that is we've done a recent survey with our client base, and we have discovered that about 30% of the folks that filled out the survey over the course of a month indicated that they had difficulty getting to us. And they were either borrowing a car or getting a ride from someone else or some other kind of having to arrange their transportation to get to us. That's 30% of the folks coming. So for that reason, I would like to ask that be approved when that comes before you, which it hasn't yet, but just putting it out there. Get it in your minds. The second point I want to make is around affordable housing. In particular, I want to just ask that each member of the council really consider strongly how you prioritize this issue. I know that there are many things that come before you that may impact or have an opportunity for affordable housing, and I just want to encourage you to consider how you prioritize that issue, because as you prioritize things, that's when they come about. The thing that I just passed out to you and for everyone else's benefit is some information that Triangle J Council of Governments pulled together showing research that indicates that affordable housing does not increase crime in an area. It does not create traffic congestion. It does not cause schools to be overcrowded. And it does not decrease property values. So there is research that shows that, and I've provided that for you. I'm not going to go into detail about it, but just wanted to provide that. My third point this evening is I know that there is an affordable housing plan up and coming. And so when that affordable housing plan is in development, I want to ask that you all, as our council members, ensure that the citizens who need affordable housing the most in our community are directly and equitably invited into that planning process, whatever that means, and by whatever means it takes to make it happen. Whether we're translating materials in different languages, whether we're going out to communities where folks are already living in affordable housing and speaking with those folks there, whether we're speaking with folks who are on the lower end of the income spectrum in our community who don't live here but work here, but find ways that we can make sure that those voices are equitably heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Widow. Next up, Tina Sherman. We also have 3 minutes, Sherman.
Good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Tina Sherman at 2251 Toad Hollow Trail. Just 4 months ago, a parental leave policy that extended paid leave only for birth mothers came before this body and was pulled from consideration. Once again, I stand before council to speak about this policy, but this time on an evening where I should be attending my oldest son's award ceremony and another son's last baseball game of the season. This is not government efficiency. I am a working mother of 4 children. My husband and I have a variety of experiences with having and not having paid leave after the birth of our sons. Normally, I would be excited to see the expansion of APEX's paid leave policy under consideration. Unfortunately, the proposal offered by Mr. Jensen, which only slightly alters what he offered in June, falls short by only expanding paid leave for mothers and limiting their lifetime benefit. Why is this a problem? Let me explain. Leave policies that provide equal time for either parent promotes equality because they foster gender equity in both the workplace and the home. In other words, such policies increase fathers' involvement with their young children, a more equitable division of parental responsibilities, and greater comfort and confidence amongst fathers in their parenting skills. Additionally, paid leave for fathers supports mothers' labor force participation. When fathers are able to share home and child care responsibilities without worrying about losing income, mothers can rest, heal, and bond with their babies, which makes for healthier moms and babies. Since the APEX parental leave policy went into effect in January of 2018, I've had the pleasure of hearing from a number of staff here in the town on how truly grateful they are for the opportunity to spend time with their family without having to sacrifice a paycheck. The town's own report states that the policy, quote, has been very well received and much appreciated by those who have used it. This is huge and is something our town should applaud. When this extended policy was introduced back in June, there was some comparison to Governor Cooper's policy and how it applied to mothers and fathers differently. I'm incredibly excited about the governor's policy that affects more than 59,000 employees within his purview, which was a good start. The governor's leadership led to other agencies following suit, but these agencies adopted gender-neutral paid parental leave policies. In other words, mothers and fathers got the same time. The 9 agencies include the Office of Administrative Hearings, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, the Office of Commission of Banks, the Office of Secretary of State, the Office of the State Auditor, the Office of State Controller, Department of Public Instruction, Department of Justice. All in all, these institutions enacted 8 weeks of paid parental leave for mothers and fathers, helping to foster equity in both the workplace and home. These are huge, life-changing wins for families across the state. APEX should be looking forward to how to continue to support the hardworking civil servants in our community. In lieu of Mr. Jensen's proposal, I urge the council to expand the already successful parental leave policy by adding 2 additional weeks of paid leave for all mothers and fathers. Also, I urge you to consider expanding leave beyond just parental, offering paid family leave to all town employees to care for loved ones facing a serious health condition or their own serious health needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sherman. Next up, we have Roseanne Lindorfer. Did I say that correctly? Rosanna.
Rosanna.
Yeah.
I want to thank each and every one of you for voting for this, making this happen. We're standing right now on the shoulders of all of our ancestors who were silenced. For the first time in 200 or 300 years, we now have a voice. We're being recognized in the land that was always ours. And it's good to see that the great people who are sitting here had something to do with that. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It touches me. It really does. This shirt that I'm wearing, the teal shirt, is the color, our family color for the Stewarts. The white lettering is the new generation. It's an appropriate day, and our ancestors would be proud. For once, they're standing tall. I want to ask you for a favor, if I can have a copy of your proclamation for our family records and for our people, because it's a moving moment, and you guys have made history. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, now what's that?
Okay.
Rosanna?
Rosanna?
Oh, thank you.
Great. So these are the only folks who signed up for the public forum, so I will close the public forum. And now we will move into public hearings. So, let's see, for public hearing number 1, no one signed up, so I will open the public hearing, close the public hearing, and since Amanda Bunce is the current planning manager, it is a public hearing and possible motion meeting regarding various amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance to the UDO. Ms. Bunce.
Hi. Okay, so this UDO amendment is actually comes back from the August 20th meeting, although it has slightly been modified. As you recall, we talked about amendments to the UDO that would support economic development opportunities on any site that's designated as a North Carolina certified site, which in Apex is known as the Cash Corporate Center. What has changed from this version of the amendment since the last time was previously there was a proposal to reduce the required riparian buffers to 50 feet or the state standard, whichever was greater, and that proposal has been removed from the request, so there's no longer a request to reduce riparian buffer widths in this. So what is left is exactly the same as was presented in August, and I'll just review those real quick for your information.
Can I ask you about the lack of that change? So that was just what you heard up here, or was that kind of a looking at the impacts and kind of deciding that 100 feet is important to have?
Staff did take input that was received from council that night, and we reconvened and met, and we looked at the difference that there would be, and decided that there is some flexibility in that outer 50 feet of that 100-foot buffer to average the buffer width. The state already allows that, our UDO allows that, and so that may be enough flexibility as that site is developing, rather than just automatically reducing it all the way to 50 feet.
Okay, thank you.
So the First Amendment, just to remind you, was to delay the full design of water and sewer infrastructure to the site plan stage instead of at subdivision stage. The next amendment was to reduce, this one is to only provide a tree survey within required buffers. The second change was to, for any North Carolina certified site, to reduce the RCA to that which is equal to or greater than the area located within required perimeter and street buffers, riparian buffers, and preserved wetlands. And then to delay the traffic impact analysis for North Carolina certified sites until the time of site plan instead of at the time of subdivision.
Okay, can we go back to reduce the RCA
Yes.
to just the wetlands? How does that affect? the RCA
Okay.
situation. If we don't have any wetlands, then what percentage of the property then becomes RCA? I guess that's where I'm having trouble.
So we have an answer for you. We've run the numbers knowing what the required perimeter buffers would be, what the riparian buffers that we know are on site, and there is a portion in the northeast corner that's pretty much undevelopable. So with all of that area, it would be at least 17.7% of the site, which adds 2.79 acres of developable land for the property. Now, I will say that along any collector streets in the site, there is a required 10-foot buffer, which could be added as RCA because it would be planted, but without any buffers along internal streets, you have at least 17.7%. The minimum required is 20. So it's a 2.3% reduction.
And this is just for certified sites?
That's correct.
Can you explain, so let's say, when we did our electric facility, there was a big oak tree that was preserved, I guess, in the development. So if there's not a survey, will there still be, how will the staff interact with anybody developing it to try to save these big trees if they are to kind of be part of the property? Will that be impossible with this change, or would it be just like, it would be encouraged, strongly encouraged?
I think if there was a tree that was in a logical place to be saved and could be saved, then, tree preservation does have benefits. But there's nothing in our current ordinances outside of RCA and buffers and then protecting the critical root zone, which is, a distance out from trees in that area.
We're not changing the protection zone, we're just changing the survey part of
We're
it.
just changing the survey part because that's essentially what the RCA would be. So we're just getting a tree survey within what essentially is going to be our RCA.
Any more comments or questions for Ms. Bunce?
So just to remind you, the planning board did recommend approval unanimously, and staff recommends approval as well. Happy to answer any other questions.
Are we all set? Any more
Well,
questions?
I'll comment a bit, I
Okay.
guess. Being in favor of economic development, I still have reservations about reducing the RCA for certified sites only, because it sends a bad message to me. To me, it sends a bad message out to the private industry arena, where we're reducing it, whereas for the town, but not for the private industry developers. And let me ask the town manager. He's wincing over there.
No wincing, I'm just curious. Yes, sir.
No, I was just asking your opinion. If you don't.
This is a policy decision of the council. This came directly from the Economic Development Committee because we're trying to maximize. We have one opportunity for a certified site right now in the town, and we're trying to maximize our ability to market and develop that. If the council says, hey, we don't want to relax that particular standard just for certified sites, this isn't us. This is not our building project. This is the private industry that will develop these sites.
Yeah.
We're just the partner in the land, and we're trying to make it as attractive as possible to try to get somebody to come in here and develop this and bring jobs to Apex, which is the reason we entered into the co-development.
And I guess for this project, it's 2.3% shift.
If I can add, it does say any certified site. So while the town of Apex currently only has one certified site, in the future, there may be others. And so while it may be a 2.3% reduction in this site, it could have broader applications in future sites.
Right. If the town were to get involved in a future certified site, we would have to be involved. So it's not, someone couldn't come in and certify the site on their own. Certified site have that certain criteria, which includes local government involvement. So,
And during the approval is when the RCA is delineated, is that?
It would most likely be during subdivision stage.
If it's at subdivision stage, then it's after approval.
The RCA requirement was it only in like riparian buffers, and what was the definition of it? Because it's not always going to be 2.3% off on certified sites, right?
For this particular site, we calculated what the RCA we know that can be provided, and that amount is 17.7%. It's possible that it could be more, but this would be the minimum that this site would provide just based on what we know of land that's within perimeter buffer, riparian buffer, preserved wetlands, and so that's the amount that we know.
So theoretically, if we were in a certified site with none of that on it, then there would be no RCA.
That is, theoretically, that is possible.
Right.
I don't know how likely it is. There wouldn't be some sort of buffer, but theoretically.
My preference in this would be to set a minimum of some sort, not end up with a almost no RCA. And whether that's 10% or whatever, as a minimum, yes, it's one site now, but like I was saying, we could have future sites coming up, and I would hate for every single piece of it to be developed and no real RCA on it, so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all in favor of making it easier for businesses to come here, but I would agree with that. I think that we need to set some sort of minimum so that we don't end up with a massive parking lot in a building. I don't know. I'm all for making it easier for businesses to come here, but I think there should be a minimum. And it doesn't have to be our standard minimum that we have now.
No, that's why I said maybe
Yeah.
10
Yeah.
instead. Or 15, yeah, either one.
So do you all have ideas on the number you want to discuss this evening, or you want to ask staff to look at it closely?
Can I ask another question, maybe?
Sure.
And this might be for somebody else, and I'll leave it up to you, but from an economic development perspective, what are kind of some standards seen in maybe the industry around in other municipalities in the state?
I will defer to Joanna Helms, who's our Economic Development Director, for that.
I was taking notes. What was the question, Mr. Moyer?
Is there a standard for RCA in certified sites, maybe in the area, Wake County, or the state that you've seen?
I was not able to find any data on that, no. I don't know.
For the record, can you say who you are?
Oh, excuse me, Joanna Helms, Economic Development Director. And to answer your questions, I did not find any specific data on that. It was more anecdotal.
So it's the pleasure of the council to think about a number this evening, or to get advice from staff, or to send it back to the committee to look at that?
I'm not really interested in getting back to committee. We've already had this once.
Mhm.
So my
Right.
point of view, I work in RTP. It's a design development for businesses that's idyllic with a bunch of trees. It's very nice. It's a 1960s kind of era development. I don't know if they would have built that like that now. I think there's wanting more things together. We have a lake around a pond around ours that we walk around, but I don't think many certified sites are going to have that kind of thing unless they're gigantic like RTP. And so I see this as kind of a special. These are special cases, and maximizing the amount of buildable land and warehouse space, whatever they need, I think is going to be worth it to these unique situations. And businesses can go to RTP if they want a bunch of trees and a lot of RCA. There's a market for that, but there's also a supply for that. And I think businesses may opt for something that's less land and more concentrated, and providing the flexibility that this is given, I think, will benefit the options that we have for that property. I don't know how much it would benefit, but I just
2.9 acres, they said.
It would, yeah. I mean that's quite a few acres, and that's hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of acreage. So that's my point of view. So maximum flexibility is where I'm coming from on these, with the protections on the riparian and the buffers.
All right. So looks like we have folks who want to think about a minimum, and then folks who don't. So is there further discussion leading to a motion, or is there a motion, or is there some more information that you need to make the decision this evening?
I mean, I don't want to arbitrarily pick a number. I mean, what
Right.
what is, yeah, what do you, I mean, I know you said there was no information on it, but what, is there any sort of number you think is a reasonable number to have as far as open space in some of these developments?
I don't really think that's an economic development question. I think it's more of a planning and question. I'm not trying to throw the ball, but there's not going to be any data that's going to support what an RCA should or shouldn't be in a business park. It's going to be up to the individual community or the watershed or what have you that has jurisdiction in that area.
I actually think it's more as a legislative decision, really,
Yeah.
of the council. That's what I think it is, and we need to decide what we want.
I'm going to propose 10%.
Is that your motion?
That's my motion.
Okay, do we have a second?
So 10% is a minimum RCA on cash corporate center is considered a one piece, right? So that's already 17 point whatever percent, right? So on any future, a minimum of 10%.
Yeah.
I personally think 10% is on the low side. Here we're talking about reducing it, and it only gets down to 17%. And I look at McGregor Industrial Park, and I understand what you're saying about trees and that sort of stuff, and it's an older development, but it's really nice because they do have the foliage and the trees and stuff like that. And I guess I look at Pinnacle Park, and that's one of our star development areas, but at the same time, it's not the equivalent of the McGregor Industrial Park in terms of looks. When I go by there, I see building after building after building, and maybe that's what you want in an industrial park, but I would think if you're trying to get quality businesses, I don't know how much value they put on having a campus that looks a bit more natural with trees and things like that. Maybe Joanna can address that.
Well, you make a good point. McGregor is a true business park. It's mostly office type tenants. Pinnacle Park does have a lot of advanced manufacturing and other types of operations there, so it's really a business and industrial park. And there is a little bit of a difference. Also, one was built more in the 80s when the land costs were a lot cheaper, and one was built later. But I can tell you that the type of clients that we're trying to recruit for Apex, and particularly to Cash Corporate Center, are going to be companies that want to be good corporate citizens. They're not going to want to be in an area that's just a barren field with no environmental amenities left. So they're going to want to see some of that. So I don't think having a minimum would be personally all that bad.
Is the business, is the prospects, are they more manufacturing in that park? Or is it limited to the type of businesses? I mean, can it, like information, like a Amazon or somebody, could they go there? Is that allowed, or does it have to be kind of more manufacturing?
No, it's a light industrial conditional zone, so there's about 22 allowable uses, which includes everything from manufacturing, but it's light manufacturing, up to offices, distribution. So it's going to be a mix, or it could be all one. It's just, but it's going to be a mix, and I think that any one of those things that you mentioned could end up locating there. So it could be an office building right next to an advanced manufacturing building, right next to our research and development company.
Okay.
So, Mr. Jensen, in your committee meeting, did the percentages not come up at all?
This is a while back. We did discuss, as I recall, the reduction, the 17.7%. I don't recall that at all as being a number. I don't think it was it available at that time?
We just got that number in the last week or so.
Yeah. So we didn't have any specific number.
All right.
And I can see a reduction, but I'd hesitate to go down to 10%, and it's solely because of the quality look.
All right, so we have a motion, we don't have a second. We've been discussing this. So is there a second to this motion?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. All right. So
Would you like to make a friendly amendment?
I would like to make a friendly amendment, if I may, to increase that to 15%.
Do you accept that as your motion? Do you accept that as a second to that motion, the 15%?
Can I ask a clarifying question? So just to confirm, we're talking about the total site. So like Cache, for example, is 100 acres, 120 acres?
121.
120 with 10-acre parcels, right?
Minimum.
Minimum. So somebody could technically buy the clear-cut 10-acre spot, but they've already met the percentage for this site because the overall site is 17.
Right, with a subdivision, it doesn't matter if it's industrial or residential or commercial, the RCA is provided over the entire subdivision. And it can be located anywhere the RCA is designated, but it's provided at the time of subdivision. It's known where it's going to be at the time of subdivision.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be on an individual parcel.
And this would, if we went to the 15%, it's not going to affect the Cache property the way I understand it. And I look back, we had a canopy study to try to get more trees in Apex, and we're excited about that. To me, you don't want to tear down trees and then try to plant them someplace else. I think you, or at least have the trees in the canopy in that location.
Okay, so we have a motion. It looks like we have a second, but you asked for more
so
clarification.
I'll second
that.
For
Okay.
15%?
Yeah, for 15%.
All right. So all in favor?
Can we have some
Oh,
discussion?
I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. So I just wanted to add that I think that I want to make sure that if we had the opportunity of a lifetime for a business to come that staff was like, hey, council is willing to look at different percentages, right? I don't want to just have a flat, and I know this is probably tough, Mr. Jensen, but I would hate to find us in a position where we turn down the opportunity of a lifetime to bring an employer to Apex, and just because we're hard on 15%, but.
Well, if something like that came up, I would suspect that the council at that time would take another close look at this situation. Right now, we're taking a close look at Cache property and saying 15% does not affect anything on Cache property. If it came to having a super tech company or something come in and they wanted to have it reduced, I think the council at that time would consider it. I just hate to put it into solid rock right now at a lower percentage.
Mr. Havens, did you have something?
I was just clarifying, so the motion is to adopt the UDO amendments with the addition of a minimum of 15% RCA.
That's correct.
That's my understanding.
That's my understanding.
Do I need to state that, what the wording would be?
I think it's.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
So the wording that would be added to subsection 9 here at the end after wetlands would be, but shall not be less than 15%. So we could just keep that same wording and add the phrase, but shall not be less than 15%.
Okay.
I think it's worth noting that the great company that may come may be dissuaded by not knowing if the council is going to lower it. I mean, I think there's a risk in doing that. Yeah, they may want to say it should be lower if we can get Amazon or somebody, really large, but they may just never show up if they see this stuff written down on paper.
But that doesn't, okay, maybe for another certified site, but that doesn't apply to the Cache site because we already have all the wetlands and,
Right.
and so
Okay.
it has no effect on what we're doing with Cache.
So I'm going to say two things. I think maybe the word shall is a little bit helpful in that, and I think it's probably time for us to vote. I think we've had enough discussion on this. All right, so all in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay, that motion passes 3-1. Thank you, Amanda. Next up, we have public hearing number 2, and no one signed up for the public hearing, so I'm going to open it and close it. And then I'm going to ask for Planning Director Diane Kin to be public hearing and possible motion to adopt an ordinance on the question of annexation. Apex Town Council's intent to annex Teresa Allen single-family property containing 3.175 acres on 1001 Greenlee Drive, annexation into the town's corporate limits. Ms. Kin.
Good evening.
Good evening.
The property is located in the far northeast area of our jurisdiction. It is a single-family home that's actually on water. They've been paying double out-of-town rates. That was something that was allowed back in the 80s and 90s, but they need to get sewer now, and so they would like to annex in order to get sewer. We do recommend approval.
What did you say about double water?
They've been getting water since the 80s or 90s, but they just pay double rates. They've never been annexed. They would like sewer now, so now they have to annex. They don't have a choice per the policy.
And the rate will go back down to regular?
Yeah, it'll go to regular once they're annexed.
So back in the, I'm sorry to ask questions, I have never heard that before. So double rate means you're hooked up to city water, but you're not.
They never annexed.
You're not on sewer,
No.
so you're paying double rates, or has no?
No, they're not annexed, so they pay double rates. They pay no taxes, so they pay double rates.
Oh, okay.
That's something that was done long ago before I started working here, and they decided to stop doing that and to require annexation to get public services.
Okay.
So it's one of those odd ones out there that just needs sewer.
Any questions for Ms. Ken?
What is the, I do have a question, what's the underlying zoning on this? Like, so, because if we annex them, then they can subdivide?
It's RR like the rest of the neighborhood.
What is RR in the town limits?
Rural residential, it's one unit.
Per acre?
Mhm.
Or is that different now?
Hmm?
Land use map?
It's RR.
Okay, oh, okay, not land use.
Any further questions for Ms. Ken or comments or?
I'll make a motion to
Second.
approve.
Wow, all right. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Motion passes. All right, now we are going to move into old business. Old business number 1 is Councilmember Bill Jensen. Discussion and possible motion to amend the town's personnel policy to include 2 weeks of paid maternity leave. Mr. Jensen.
Well, I did bring this up about 4 months ago, and at that time, we wanted to make sure, at least I did, what the legalese aspect of it was. And our legal department has looked at it, the personnel department has looked at it, and actually wrote the item. And this is to allow women who have children or give birth an extra 2 weeks. It's in addition to the paid parental leave, and an additional 2 weeks to mend, I guess is what you would say. And my past experience as a father and husband, my experience was that my wife needed more time, certainly, than I did. I know that goes contrary to what others have said, but that's my experience. And I thought that by allowing 2 additional weeks to our staff, it would be a plus. And certainly they have embraced the paid parental leave that we have. This doesn't take anything away from it. I would expect that they would embrace an opportunity for a mother who has given birth who needs some extra medical time to have that time off.
So I'd like to actually make a motion related to this policy proposal. As the chair of personnel who brought the paid parental leave policy forth, that was successfully passed a while ago. So my motion will be consistent with the spirit of trying to be, well, we amend things, we want to expand things and make them better. And so my motion would be consistent with what I promised that night, was to start with sort of the baby steps and move forward, for no pun intended. So thank you. So what I'd like to do then is, recognizing that we are at 6 weeks now, I'll make a motion to amend the existing paid parental leave policy to increase from 6 weeks to 8 weeks. This will then remove, and it would be effective today, October 1st, 2019. And what that would do is we would just remove the additional medical complication portion, which is the mothers who are able to get 8 weeks. It would just remove that, and would then allow for people to have whatever is going on with them medically, whether it's mental health, behavioral health, whether it's a medical issue. Actually could keep that more private and not have to share that with her employer. And so that's my motion, to amend the existing policy to just be simple and clean, to go from 6 weeks to 8 weeks. effective October 1st, 2019. So that's my motion, and is there a second?
I'll second that.
Can I ask a point of order on this? I actually agree with you, but can we amend a motion before it's been seconded and in that discussion phase?
There wasn't a motion. Mr. Jensen did make,
he didn't make a motion.
No, he didn't.
Oh, he didn't make the motion?
No, he did the
Mayor Pro Tem
proposal.
jumped in.
Yeah,
Okay.
he went through his proposal, and I said I wanted to make a motion.
You want to amend his, okay, so you want to make the original motion?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's allowed in the rules, I guess? Okay.
It's the original motion that's been made. There was only a possible motion.
Possible motion, gotcha, sorry. Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Well, obviously, I disagree with the motion, and I think we as a town consist of something like 70% males, 30% females, and here's an opportunity, what I was proposing, to allow the females who give birth to have an opportunity to have the extra 2 weeks. Now, we can extend this paid parental leave until it's 12 weeks or 20 weeks or half a year. But money doesn't grow on trees. We're talking about taxpayer money that goes into this. And I think that we should massage the program to meet the needs of women especially. And another reason I brought this back, quite frankly, is I got a number of emails, I got a number of people commenting in person, and out of all of those, I don't think Ms. Sherman sent me an email, maybe she did, but I only had one that I recall that was negative. They're all positive to have an additional 2 weeks of maternity leave.
So I'm happy to respond a little bit on that, since it was, I was the original person who brought this with staff who actually co-presented. One of the things that I know we're able to do, and there's a lot of things you're legally able to do, doesn't mean it's always the right thing to do, but when we separate mothers, we say some are birth mothers, and some are adopted mothers, or some are fostering mothers, is a mother. And so I don't saying birth mother, while I do appreciate the sentiment of the healing, I'm a mother as well, but I also want to also look from things that are not my own lens, and that a mother is a mother and a father is a father, and they're both parents. And so I don't think we talked about this before, and in the personnel committee meeting, neither Mr. Moore or I made the motion when you brought it to our committee to do this. And so now that it's coming back, I'm not in favor of expanding something to limit it. So, but I will also, for folks who may not know, is that on the personnel committee, what we did do the same evening that you brought this other was instead, because family medical leave is a federal statute, and so what we did is we actually expanded the definition for family. People may not know that the federal statute does not allow for children who are adult children to be taken care of, that it has to be a parent. It's not your mother-in-law, your father-in-law. And so what the town did to sort of get at more people be able to use this benefit is the immediate family member now is defined as spouses, including common law, children, regardless of age, parents, siblings, grandparents, grandchildren, regardless of whether such are related by blood, adoption, or marriage, and including guardians. So that's one of the things that we did do in response to your bringing this item was unanimously passed at our committee to do that. And I did receive numbers of the men here. I believe there were more men in the town who received this benefit than women here, and I cannot find my my document right now. So those are a couple of answers to your concerns.
Mr. Havens has the numbers on that.
Would you do that, Mr. Havens, and give us the numbers that are pertinent for this discussion related to gender then?
Yes, ma'am. So since the paid parental leave benefit was adopted in January of 2018, 7 female staff members and 23 male staff members have availed themselves of the benefit.
Thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am.
7 females is what you said?
Yes, sir.
And that's about the ratio of what we have in terms of staff from a male-female standpoint.
Maybe I'll chime in. When we had the personnel committee meeting, we looked at not only the numbers of who uses it, but how long they were using it. And I saw many people who, on average departments had 40 days of usage, which would be 8 weeks. And I was a little surprised we didn't go forward with 8 weeks as a recommendation back then. I'm glad to see it now. In terms of economics, Wake County and the state of North Carolina are doing 8 weeks, so I think we're competing with those folks too. So I think it makes sense both what women and men need when they have a child, as well as making sure we're competitive in the workplace. So I'm glad you had that amendment or the original motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion to amend the existing paid parental leave policy from 6 weeks to 8 weeks effective today?
I'm glad to see it happen.
All right, I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no.
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 Okay, passes 3-2. All right, I'm going to go into, looks like we have no unfinished business. We'll move into new business. Item number 1, Councilmember Bill Jensen requests staff to perform necessary study or studies to pursue a potential bond issue for the installation of parking canopies with solar voltaic systems over the town of Apex parking lots. Mr. Jensen?
Okay. Well, I've done a lot of looking at the parking lots. Let me step back. We as a council passed a couple resolutions, and one resolution said that we would be at 80% renewable energy by 2035. I thought, that's not going to be a hard thing to do. We just throw a bunch of solar panels on top of our roofs and we're set. Well, I've been wrong in the past, and I've been really wrong in this case. By putting panels on all of our roofs, we're probably doing 7 or 8% of the town's usage of electricity. So then the next question is, how do we get to a point where we can economically meet our resolution and benefit the town at the same time totally? Our town manager mentioned solar canopies for the parking lot out here, and I took that and expanded it just a little. I expanded it to every parking lot that we have, including parking lots, not every parking lot, but almost every parking lot, including Parental Park, and took a look at it in terms of what would it cost and that sort of thing. If we did canopies with the solar, my gross estimate was $15 million. Now, I think staff needs to look at that to see what the exact number is. Now, the solar part of the canopies pay for themselves plus some. At least that's what I evaluated from the pilot solar system that we have on our utilities building. And I was trying to be very careful. You know, the first time I went through it, I used just kind of a smear of 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is not the way you should evaluate, in my opinion now, solar PV systems, because you have a demand charge and then you have the cost of electricity. And it depends on what that solar PV system is doing when the demand charge takes place. And the demand charge is a charge that is evaluated once a month based on the maximum kilowatts that are being used by the town at that one time. In the summer, the demand charge timing takes place late in the day, 4 o'clock, typically, 5 o'clock maybe. In the winter, it takes place early in the morning. Now, I went through and used the data from the solar PV system, and we do okay in the afternoon. We're still generating a decent amount of electricity, but by golly, in the winter, we don't hit the demand charge that well. So, out of all of that, it took the 11.2% that I originally projected, it took it down to 9.2%. And I think that's a fairly accurate number. But talking with our town manager, I know he wants to have experts take a look at this. And I agree. I think if we're going to look at something of any substantial amount of money, we need to have an expert's opinion. We'll need to know more closely what does it cost for the solar canopy structure itself. I've talked to a couple of businesses that do that. Well, one finally got back to me and said, use for your estimate $1.25 per watt. Okay. We are paying for our solar PV systems right now that the last step we're going to get in $1.40 per watt for the system itself. Okay. So the solar canopy structure probably will cost less per watt than the actual system. So if I take that 9% and cut it in less than half, we're still looking at 4 or 5% in all probability rate of return on the total system. We can borrow money for, the last time was 2%, and I looked at 3% in terms of how far out it's going to get the payback. So we can borrow the money, and the experts can confirm this. We can borrow the money and pay it off in part, in reasonable part, by the solar PV system. Now we may have to add a little bit each year to cover the principal part of the loan. I'm not sure. That's what we'll find out of this. So if we do all of the solar canopies in all our parking lots, we should be able to get up to about 5,500 kilowatts of generating 5.5 megawatts, which gets us about halfway to where we need to get to if we're going to be 100%, and probably a little more than halfway if we're trying to get to 80%. I'm not sure. The experts can take a look at that too. I grossed the numbers. I think it's reasonably accurate though. So what I'm asking tonight is simply, if council believes that this is a route to go to meet our resolution requirements that we put up on ourselves, to have staff dig into it with their experts as necessary to evaluate what the cost will be, what the return on investment will be from the system through the solar. Now, you can't say it's generating money, but you can say it's generating savings. And as old Ben Franklin said, a penny saved is a penny earned. And that's what we're looking at with this. So what I would like to make a motion, I guess, to have staff evaluate placing solar canopies on our parking lots and to evaluate what the rate of return will be and the money aspect of it.
So
and I'll work with staff.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Does this need a motion, or just people can say it's a priority for them? Because I don't think it needs a motion, does it?
Can I chime in?
There's a motion on the floor.
But it just, okay, so the wording didn't sound like it was a, okay, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know I'd like to amend the motion. I'm not sure if I can do that right now, or it needs a second.
It just needs a second, and I think Ms. Killens was going to say something, but I interrupted by asking about the process for my paperwork, so.
I would like staff to evaluate this, but I also want to know what other ways we can meet that 80% by 2035. There's got to be other ways to do it besides just solar canopies. So I think,
I understand what you're saying, but what are the other ways when you start thinking about it?
and that's what I would like to have staff.
They can look at that. We can buy a solar farm if that's what we wish to do. We can buy renewable energy credits, which isn't which is an ongoing cost. There's a number of things, and they can certainly, I appreciate what you're asking. I think when the whole thing settles out, we'll find that the solar canopy is the next step.
So
the next lowest hanging fruit.
what I'm wondering is if it would be more appropriate to refer this to an environmental committee or the environmental review board, which we just created, to come up with many ideas, and not to disclude this, but this also, to see how we can get to that 80%. So maybe a broader approach.
I appreciate that. I think the experts, rather than the committee or the environmental board, would be better, unless we have experts on those boards, to take a look at that. But I think that if town staff, maybe they need to give us a budget as to what this is going to cost to start looking at it. But I think in experts is where you want to get the information. I mean, I could sit on that board and I would be sitting there saying the same things as I'm saying now. I've done the look at it. I'm not an expert, but it looks like this, and that. But that isn't set in concrete. So I would rather go to the staff and have them get the people who know, who have the evaluation capability to directly look at it.
Right, and what I'm saying is this kind of narrows the scope of a study, this particular motion, and what I'd like to do is keep it broad so that they have other options.
And I agree with that. If it doesn't take too much manpower, but I mean, the first cursory look at this thing, there's only so many things you can do.
Sure.
The cheapest and the best return are PV systems on our rooftops. We've done that. The next step is what? To me, it's solar canopies, but we can certainly look at buying a solar farm. You can get actually into a solar farm probably cheaper per watt than you can get into solar canopies. On the other hand, if you're doing a solar farm, you're going to have to be selling it to Duke Energy at their avoided cost, which is probably 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Whereas when we do what we're doing, we get advantage of the demand charge reduction.
Excuse me.
If we do it in town and are putting it onto our system. But I'm good with that. Let's have it expanded and have them look at the other things.
Okay, so you're expanding your motion to include any options to...
I'll expand it to include any options. To look at the options and then focus on the best option that will get us towards where our resolutions have placed us.
I wanted to make sure I recognized Mr. Gant before I forgot.
Yeah, I want to chime in. So I'm excited about the idea of those solar canopies. You send pictures around. You're talking about generation entirely in this discussion. I think usage is a really big important part of it too. I would wager that if we convert every LED light in town that's outside or from whatever it is now to LED, it may have a much faster rate of return than solar. And therefore maybe would suggest, even if it's not generating renewable power, it still is reducing our usage of non-clean. And I think the best way of looking at that would be some kind of energy audit that maybe one of the universities around here would help us do, and the environmental committee may review that. The audit may be saying what we're using as well as generation possibilities, and have the environmental committee kind of review that and make recommendations from that report to us, based on the best rate of return and trying to meet our goals.
And I agree. I certainly switching over to LEDs, and we're doing it already, in fact. The question is how fast do you want to switch over to LEDs? You want to do it right now if we had the money, because long term it certainly does, Mr. Gant, as you well know, save us a lot of energy and a lot of money.
And I would think, to include all of that in a study to to try to get us to the goal of 80% by 2035. So I will second that motion with that amendment.
Okay, so let me think what I repeat what I think I heard, is that we're going to send a request for a study to staff, but also to engage the one of the environmental, either the committee or the boards of the committee, and problem solving around how to get to where we want to get to related to being green and more efficient and consistent with our resolutions. And also engaging experts possibly who may be like from the university. So I think it's about three things. It's a staff working with a board, citizens working with possible other experts that maybe get us even good results for a cheaper rate if we're going to people who maybe even live here who are experts. And we've done that on Bill and I, we did that with the, one of the first neighborhoods that we started working on with the flooding issue. We brought in people that were experts within their own neighborhood in Shepherd's Vineyard and tried to fix some of the issues that we could with them. So, and maybe that we can do that by saving money, bring in experts in the community and come back with something that is a little more robust than this narrow focus.
Can I ask also, the staff theoretically might come back and say, we need to spend X number of dollars to hire some experts.
Yeah.
I'm guessing this.
Need a budget.
Yeah. They may have to come back and say, if we spend, $5,000, I'm not sure how much it costs, but like to say what our energy audit is and give options to proceed. That may be part of what comes back to us first.
Yeah.
Right. Are you guys in agreement? Or
it sounds fine to me. Does that make sense to you, Mr. Havens? Is that clear as mud?
So
I'm clear because, in looking at what the council's priorities were for the current year, this was not one. So we will anticipate this being something that we want included in the fiscal 21 budget and work plan. Is that?
That's what I think. That's what it would be unless you all.
Yeah, and that's probably the time frame that's going to have to be with this situation. But I think that we also need to look at funding this through loans if we're going to do the canopy situation, because we can borrow money so cheap rather than spending straight up taxpayer money to go ahead and get the loan, just like we did with Pinnacle Park. Or with Pleasant.
That's okay. So does that consistent with 2021? Oh, sure. 2021, I think, is what the.
Right, 'cause it'll take us some time to get our ducks in a row and figure out what we'll need to contract and with whom, scope that, and then that can be worked into the budget that Mr. Purvis will be preparing.
Will that study, I'm assuming, will also consider our status as an electricity and all the requirements that we have to meet with being an electricity and servicing our customers through that. And,
yes, sir.
I guess I would just like to add that a priority from our citizens that we've heard is transportation. That's a big thing. I haven't heard anything, and I don't think any of us, at least I haven't been copied in any emails to all council about us becoming a green city. Everybody talks about transportation and how difficult it is, and we have just considered the idea of a $15 million bond, not for transportation improvements around town, but for solar energy. So I'd like us to stay focused on what we've heard from everybody about transportation around town as we grow. But
I think the motion was toned down a bit from that number and doing a bond. I think it was our ducks in a row and studying it first.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, I think it was toned down from not a bond, but just studying the issue.
Right, to see if we can make improvements.
That's right. The bond is kind of off the table. That's how I'm looking at it.
That's fine to be off the table, but we need to look at what rate of return we will get on some of these different ideas, like certainly replacing all of our lights with LEDs and things like that, so that we know what rate of return. Now, if we're going to borrow money to do something, if we know that our rate of return on what we're doing is a lot higher than the cost of borrowing the money, then it makes a lot of sense to go ahead and do that. So, when I was looking at it, I thought we were just going to give it to staff to find experts, and I don't know what the committee or a board do.
So we've had a lot of discussion, and so I think we have a motion, and we have a second, and some friendly amendments, and some other conversation. And so I think for review, right now it is really about just studying what we should pursue, what we could pursue as a town that's consistent with the resolutions that we passed on being more green. That's what I think that's what the simple thing we're doing at this time that I think more people would be in agreement with at this time, and then coming back. So I think that's the motion, and that's the second. And so I'm going to call for the vote.
Do we need a vote on this?
Well, I was thinking from the language that I did not, but then he made the motion, so she said, yeah, we could.
Oh, we do need a vote on this?
Okay.
I mean, I think
We have to start.
has your direction either way, but just to wrap it all up.
Okay, all right, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Any opposed?
No.
Okay, that passes 3-1, so. All right, now we're going to move to new business 2, which was consent number 2 that Mr. Gant pulled off for discussion on the motion to approve the ordinance amendment related to mobile food vendors. So then, do you want to start
I
it?
appreciate
And
the
then
chief being here, and sorry about that. I think this issue probably can be of public interest. I more want to discuss the procedure, how it would work, so that we hear it and the public can hear it. That way, there's no confusion. Like, anybody is watching it, or the food trucks there, or I didn't quite understand who applied to the permits and how it worked, and I was wondering if we could just go through that, how it's been proposed.
Sure, I'll ask Chief Letney if he'll address that to the council.
Good evening, Council. The consent item you have in front of you is to amend the current mobile food vendor ordinance to allow service from a town right-of-way. Currently, the ordinance that is on the books does not allow that. So there's been a request to amend that ordinance to allow serving from the right-of-way. While we feel there is a place and a spots around town where that would be safe and would be appropriate to do so, we don't think it's appropriate in all cases. Therefore, there needs to be some sort of review process. So in working with the town attorney, we came up with a process where the mobile food vendor would still apply for the permit to serve wherever. If they also wanted to serve from the right-of-way, they would request that in a separate permit. We would review the location. We would look at standard public safety issues like fire hydrants, crosswalks, driveways. Is the road wide enough? Will there be sight issues for people walking by on a sidewalk? And so on and so forth. And we would then specify a particular place where that, or where any mobile food vendor could operate from in a town right away. So by doing that, we would pick a place that that did not create a public safety hazard, in our opinion, after reviewing the site of where the mobile food vendor wanted to operate from. We would require that they serve from the curb side of the vehicle, and they would minimize any crossing the road as possible. We don't want to have wholesale pedestrians crossing a busy street to get to a food truck if there is a better place where they could park and minimize the crossing of the road. So that's essentially what the ordinance revision you have in front of you says. We would process that permit upon request of the mobile food vendor and look at the specific location.
And so right now, they have to request a permit to operate in town at all, right? Do they do it once a year?
They do it annually. There are some exceptions. So if they are operating as part of an already approved special event permit issued by the town, they do not need a mobile food permit on top of that. If they are operating in a private way, for example, HOA event that is only open to members of that HOA, they don't need a permit. But if it's open to the public, then they do. So it depends on a lot of specifics.
And so this additional permit would be basically administered at the same time, and they would say, hey, you want to apply for both of these, both the right-of-way and the regular permit?
So right now, they apply for a location, which is private property, with permission of the private property owner. So when they apply, in theory, they would realize that they want to operate from a town right-of-way, and they would apply for that. We would certainly give them guidance, and if we saw in their application they wanted to operate from a town street or something along those lines, then we would tell them that they needed to apply in this way rather than this way. And this does not affect town parks. That's a separate permit process, and they would need a park concession or permit to operate within any town parks.
Okay.
And I would ask Ms. Hoey to add if I've missed anything in the ordinance that we've drafted.
I think you covered it.
So they theoretically, before they do their next year's permit, like if they wanted to operate on a right-of-way tomorrow, they could basically do this permit, like they would submit that shortly, I guess.
Yes, they could do that as soon as it's passed, and of course we have to draft the actual procedure and the permit itself, which we are already starting to do. We just wanted to wait for council to approve it before we finalize things. We will not require them to wait till their existing permit expires. That doesn't make sense. We would, at this point, if they wanted to apply in the next whatever short period of time, in theory, what we could do is issue the permit if it meets the criteria and have it expire at the same time their existing mobile food vendor permit expires. We don't want to have two separate expiration dates. That creates some confusion. And when that happens, generally you have someone who is operating outside of one of the two laws. Their primary business is not ordinance review. It's their mobile food vendor. So we feel it would make it easier for the mobile food vendor if we had the permits coincide and expire at the same time.
And I guess, sorry, last question. So I guess in this case, this would provide a nice, kind of description of where they can operate. They would learn about the rules about the fire hydrants and the 15 feet and all that stuff, I guess, from this.
Right, they were learned from this. There are also several other ordinances that apply. For example, you can't park on a crosswalk. You would think most people would know that, but we do want to have the administrative ability to look at where they want to park and look at those things just in case something's missed. And while a crosswalk is obvious, a fire hydrant is obvious, parking within 15 feet of a private driveway may not be. And out of respect for that private property owner, we want to be able to make sure that a mobile food vendor would be in compliance not only with this ordinance, but with all related ordinance about where you can park a vehicle.
Any more questions? Anyone? So because we pulled it, we do need to go ahead and do it. So I will call for a motion to approve this ordinance amendment related to mobile food vendors. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion. I was one that was discovered this was an issue to begin with, and I'm glad the quick work that we've done to address this.
All right. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Motion passes. Thank you, Chief Letney. So now we're going to go into our work session that we moved up. And so while it says it's a work session, we will remain in here and get information from Ms. Ken. It's a discussion about UDO Section 2.218B5, continuance of public hearing in order to provide direction to staff relative to possible work on a future UDO amendment. Ms. Ken.
All right, good evening. So it's my understanding that some or all of you had questions about this section of the ordinance after your last meeting. Section 2218B5 has been in the UDO since its adoption on August 1st, 2000. The section was written by an attorney at the Clarion Consulting Firm who wrote the original UDO. The section is up on the screen here. 5A reads, the body conducting the public hearing may, on its own motion or at the request of any person, continue the public hearing to a fixed date, time, and place. An applicant shall have the right to request and be granted one continuance. However, all subsequent continuances shall be granted at the discretion of the body conducting the public hearing only upon good cause shown. Applicants have typically used this provision in one of three ways. First is to try to find a compromise either with council or with neighbors, often caused by last-minute requests or feedback, which would require them to revise their petition. Second, when they've had issues on the private side that required some time to sort out. For example, you may remember the Sweetwater major site plan, they asked for their continuance because they switched lighting designers and needed another month to be compliant with the UDO. Or third, to make changes after receiving planning board's recommendation when the planning board and town council meetings are back-to-back like they are this month on October 14th and 15th. The alternatives to this provision would be for the applicant to request the continuance at the body's discretion, whether that's planning board or council, or to withdraw the petition and prior to the vote and start the public process over. Be happy to answer any questions.
Are we allowed to keep number 2, this 2 section in there, but have a time limit like 24 hours before the council meeting as a way to, so all the neighbors don't show up and they have to go home?
I think they have to show up anyway. We get this question a lot from neighbors, and I never tell folks not to come to a public hearing. It's not continued till you guys vote on it. So I don't know that even if they gave us 24 hours that we would notify the neighbors, because it's really at their risk. I've had people in the past hear directly from the developer and understood that it was going to happen, and when they've asked us, I'm like, I am never going to tell someone not to come to a meeting.
I think some of the pause some of us had was that just the automatic nature of it. And so if there seemed to be evidence that there was an opportunity for the two sides, for lack of a better term, to get together and to have some kind of consensus and some agreement over some give and take that could have occurred, and could have occurred during that meeting, then to just have this automatic, automatic, then who wouldn't take it? I don't want to say take advantage of it, but who wouldn't do that? If you had an opportunity to show up and just say, well, I'll just get more time, perhaps this will encourage people to have more conversation with the people who feel most impacted, so that people don't come here, and perhaps have to get babysitters, leave work early, whatever people are doing to come, just to be told that it's more than likely it's not going to be heard because we have to give them this continuance. So I feel like the automatic nature of it is what bothered me. I don't think it should be shall or it could. It shouldn't be an automatic no matter what. I don't think there's always merits to a continuance.
I would agree with that. And I would propose striking some language here to make it be up to the discretion of the council to provide those continuances.
I guess I had a question was, sometimes it feels like continuances are required because of continued disagreements or hiring somebody. Sometimes it feels like strategy about making the opposition wait another month and maybe having less people there. So do you have a feel for, are we going to mess up the first part by trying to minimize the strategy part of it?
So I would just say staff does not have a recommendation. This is a procedural and legal issue. It has nothing to do with the planning process department. So we don't have a recommendation. If you all would like for it to be at your discretion, I think that you can ask your attorney if that's a legal way to go and have at it.
I would like to think that, if a developer has a genuine change coming up or a genuine reason to have a continuance, that the council would listen to that. But I do feel like there have been some times where it wasn't warranted and it was granted because we had to. So my thought is that it should be up to our discretion as a council whether to grant a continuance.
You want to change the shall to a may in number A, letter A section?
I would propose saying an applicant shall have the right to request a continuance. However, all continuances shall be granted at the discretion of the body.
I think the objective of anybody that brings something in front of us is to get 3 votes, right? That's the objective. So as far as the continuance of the last man about that Morris Acres, I don't think y'all might have known different, but I didn't know until that meeting started that they were talking about pushing. So it wasn't a pre-planned thing. I think they realized that they didn't do enough to get the support. So they want to go back to the drawing board, go talk to neighbors, and not have to go through that whole process of notification, which I think takes a couple of months. Diane, how long does it take for, like, to go through the public notice and redo all the meetings and resubmit and do all that?
It depends on the month and how many days are between meetings, actually, but if they have to start over with notice, they have to do 10 days prior to a neighborhood meeting. The neighborhood meeting can only be held Monday through Thursday and cannot be a holiday, so sometimes that will add a week or two into it. We have to have 10 days prior to the planning board notification before the planning board public hearing, and then 10 days prior to the town council hearing. And so most of the time it will delay it at least 2 months because of just timing issues.
And my thought on that specifically is that's having it be at the discretion of the council means that the developer is going to have to negotiate with the neighbors and the people that are around them more so than waiting till a council meeting and deciding they don't have 3 votes and then saying, oh, well, maybe I should listen to the people that actually live close by. It will force that relationship to happen and that understanding. That's my thought in this.
Yeah, I mean, if it's automatic, then people, they can come, but if it's automatic, then we're gonna have to do the continue. We can't say no to it. So I do think that having more discretion, having more information in front of you will then allow you to say, well, that is good cause, or it doesn't seem like it's good cause. I do think that would be a better way to govern, for people to have more information about what is actually going to happen, and for us to really know, and to say, like, I'm going to change a broad thing, like what are the things that you're working on? And if the neighbors are saying they haven't got anything they wanted, but if they come together and say there's a couple of things we're kind of meeting in the middle, there's a couple of things we want to discuss, then that to me is worth having another meeting. But I don't think it's efficient to just say, well, it's going to be about this broad issue, when that issue could have been mitigated during the meeting. I don't think that's efficient. I don't think that's fair to people.
Would this apply to both the planning board and council meetings as far as the public hearing part?
It would apply to anyone that holds a public hearing, so I guess it would include Board of Adjustment as well.
Environmental, I guess.
They wouldn't have public hearings.
No.
I'm just thinking about our discretion and trying to avoid everybody coming out in that versus making sure there's ample flexibility for the developer to make changes that we want or the neighbors want.
Real changes.
I think this may be going too far if we make it more discretionary. Maybe not, I don't know, but that's my concern with this. I didn't like what happened last time. Everybody had to go leave. That made me unhappy.
Yes.
But that may provide opportunity to go speak to the neighbors again. I'm not sure what's going to happen with that development, but yeah, it felt bad. But I don't know what's the right answer is here.
So do we want to not take any action on this right now and maybe think about some wording? We don't have to do anything right now with this. We can just leave it the way it is right now and think about it some more, or have further discussion, or...
I think the number of requests for continuance is relatively small versus all the numbers of items that we look at. So I personally think that as it sits, has worked for many years, and I think it's fine to leave it as it is. That's my thing. Each of us comes down here twice a month. Yes, sometimes when there is a continuance requested at the end of the process, the neighbors are down here. Is it that big of a situation to come twice? We come twice a month.
I think that's apples and oranges.
Well,
I do.
I'm sorry, but that's the way we get it.
So are there any more questions or comments related to this item? Work session, it's a work session item, so I guess we don't have to take an action right now. Is that right, Mr. Manager?
Right, we were just, we
Yes.
heard the concern and want to give you an opportunity to have a discussion, and if you want to provide any direction to staff about creating language obviously has to come through the process of UDO amendment, which involves public hearing. So there is a process to make the change, but we heard the concern, wanted the council to have the opportunity for discussion and direction if you want to give any.
And are there any legal, if we've made it more up to the discretion of the council, are there legal issues we may run into that you know of?
No, the statutes provide that the council may continue a public hearing, and if you continue it to a date certain, then you don't have to re-advertise and do all that additional public notice again. So that's the one place where the statute speaks to the council continuing public hearings. There's no due process rights or any other that I'm aware of that entitles a applicant to a continuance other than it's in our UDO.
And does that apply as well to the Board of Adjustment and the Planning Board?
It does. It's any public hearing before a body that is governed under the UDO.
So what's the pleasure of the council to take this information and not take an action this evening, or take an action this evening, or adopt what we have in front of us, or make changes to that? I think those are the three choices. Do nothing, take what we got here, what we're provided here by staff, or make changes to what we have.
I think I'll make a motion that we change that language, or propose a change of language, giving the council and the planning board and board of adjustment more discretion about continuances. I don't want to have that happen again. What happened last time? I was unhappy with the situation, so if I can avoid that, I think we would. If there's a continuance need that's legitimate and would be helpful, I think we'll allow that. But I'm not sure that we don't know what it was, but we would have heard the reason last night if we'd had a different kind of rule in place. So that's my motion. Oh,
just to clarify that you're directing staff to bring back a UDO amendment through the public process and public hearing.
Correct.
And I would second that.
Okay. All right. So, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay. 3-1. Motion passes. Did you vote, Bill? Did you vote?
I went silent, which means I did vote yes.
It means you voted, you didn't vote, but it's a yes.
But not
a happy one.
Not a happy one. I think that the way it was set up is probably the best.
All righty. So now we are going into closed session to, I need a possible motion to go into closed session to discuss a personnel matter. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right. So we will, all in favor of going into closed session? Say aye.
Aye.
All right, and there's no opposed. And so for the public, as far as my agenda shows, there will be no further business when we get finished with our closed session. So go in there and then we'll come out and adjourn. So thank you for coming.
Yeah, but it'll be on us to make our document instead of.
I think we've got to figure out, the communication has got to be.
I will leave them out at my desk over there in case you guys want some. I mean, you never know, you might. Now, I did that and that light didn't light up.
We're going to have to be really tight on communication. So maybe that's what we'll do with the line.
I guess I trust councils, us and the future ones to not use this.
But no, but we have to let you know the public.
Yeah, but it didn't come up.
So maybe in the language, for not like days, something in the language we could do to get at, like, when the developer has to say something to us, like, you know how it says it's done on there?
If he has to request it sooner.
Yes, because it can be like Tuesday at 12.
Something else.
Yeah, oh, go in the closed session, yeah. Thank you.
Ms. Dozier, you don't need me for anything else like this?
I need you to hang around. I might want to chat about, like, no.
Wow.
Exactly.
I'm usually pretty nice to you. Usually.
Usually. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ms. Dozier.
Okay, so I didn't gavel us because we're still right?
Yeah, you have to come back in and close the meeting, actually.
Right, exactly. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Another UDO amendment.